Thank you for having me here. I'm the founder of Mindvalley, which is the world's biggest mind, body, and spirit training platform. What I want to talk about here is, this is just a fun little conversation where I'm going to take you on a journey of recent human history and give you a glimpse of where humanity might be going. And the ideas we're going to talk about actually come from this man, Charles Darwin. So if you don't know Charles Darwin, he was recently voted as the fourth most significant Brit in history. And the reason, of course, was because of his theory of evolution. But people don't really fully understand Darwin. For example, many people think that Darwin spoke about this concept called survival of the fittest. He never actually ever used those words. But you know what words he did use? Darwin actually used this word, diffusion of sympathy. Darwin was a philosopher who spoke about the human heart. And in a really interesting text from 1872, this is a really obscure book, Darwin put down what I think is probably one of the most profound paragraphs of text ever written in the English language. What I'm going to do in this 15-minute talk is simply unravel what Darwin said, because in it is a prediction of where humanity is going to go within the next 200 to 300 years. So, what Darwin was essentially speaking about was how we are going to evolve in terms of our sense of identity, from tribes to states to nations to unions of nations like the EU, to eventually identification as humanity as a whole, and then identification with all life. In short, Earth identity. Philosophers call this cosmocentrism. Let's start with the actual text. Darwin wrote this: as man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he ought to extend his social instincts and sympathy to all members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. Now you got to remember, what Darwin is saying here is really obvious, right? He's saying as we move from hunter-gatherers to tribes, we start assembling tribes into nations because it is convenient. Tribes can trade with each other, there's less war. But the curious thing here, the word sympathy in 1872 is similar to the word compassion today. When spiritual teachers here talk about compassion, that's what Darwin is talking about. He's saying we're extending our compassion to a larger circle. But Darwin goes further. So here he's talking about going from tribe to nation. He then goes on to say, this point once being reached, there's only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathy extending to the men of all nations and races. Here he's saying, just like 2,000 years ago, if you think about, say, for example, the Greek city-states before they became Greece as a country, today we think of nations, but eventually we're going to start seeing unions of nations. Darwin, in fact, predicted the European Union. And it's interesting to see, will such unions of nations emerge in other parts of the world? Now, he goes further. If indeed such men are separated from him by great differences in appearance or habits, experience unfortunately shows how long it is before we look at them as our fellow creatures. Very obvious here, but not something we think about. Darwin is saying that as nations come together, the more different another human being looks in terms of skin color, or in terms of how you pray, or in terms of how you dress, it takes a little bit longer. When you understand this, you understand why, for example, with what's happening in Ukraine, there is so much momentum to help Ukraine from Europe. Ukrainians essentially look European. But you don't see as much momentum for situations where the people who are the victims of a war or an earthquake may not look completely European. Nothing wrong here, but Darwin is saying that eventually, though, our sympathies will cross these boundaries of dissimilarity. Darwin goes on to say this. Well, when you understand this, you understand something really important about modern politics. A phenomenal way to win votes is to create fear of others. But it is also really, really, really bad policy. Think about what happened with Brexit. Brexit and the encouragement to vote for Brexit was essentially based on lies. And one of the biggest lies was this poster called Breaking Point. In this poster, what Nigel Farage showed were hordes of Middle Eastern men apparently flocking into Britain because, theoretically, Turkey might join the EU. which is actually not in discussion, and Britain isn't even part of Schengen. This entire scenario was made up. But what happened is it swayed people because of fear of other, as Darwin said, to vote for Brexit, one of the greatest examples of a country shooting itself in the foot. Today, what we can see is, opinion aside, if you look at actual data, the majority of Brits consider Brexit a bad decision. How can we create a world where fear of other is no longer a tool that can be swayed by politicians who don't actually have useful ideas, but know how to poke fear to win votes? Our prejudices tend to defy actual data, and this is something really fascinating about the human race. So I'm sure you guys have heard of Hans Rosling. He wrote a book called Factfulness, and he shows how what we think about the world is actually wrong. The vast majority of human beings make false predictions about our world today and have false ideas about other people. So for example, I want you to take this guess yourself. What percentage of the world population today live in a country other than the country in which they were born? This is a very important thing, because when leaders talk about border walls, they're essentially saying if we don't create a border wall, hordes of people who don't look like us are going to flock into our border. But if you actually think about it, what percentage of people in the world today live in a country other than the country that they were born? Now keep in mind, you have countries like the Emirates, like Singapore, you have cities like Miami, you have the European Union where people are moving around. Should be quite a lot, right? What percentage do you think? Ask yourself that. Almost inevitably, you will overestimate. The actual number is only 3.6. Less than 4% of human beings have actually crossed borders to a country that is outside the country they were born in. But ironically, the cities with the largest number of people who have crossed borders are actually some of the greatest cities in the world. London, New York, Paris, Dubai, Singapore. It turns out encouraging people to migrate and creating diversity in your cities is actually really, really good for business and social life. So why do we fear others? I'm in the business of raising consciousness. My platform trains 20 million people globally, and one of the things we train people on is the idea of elevating consciousness. It turns out if you look at all the great spiritual teachers, including people like Sadhguru, who are speaking right now across the room, the one commonality in terms of raising consciousness is an idea called unity. It's the idea that we extend our sympathies, as Darwin said, to people outside our regular circle, the regular circle of people who look like us, who pray like us, and who live within our borders. But why do we fear others? Our opinions of others are locked in time. It's a really curious thing about humanity today. We learn about something as children, and 50 years later, we believe that the world hasn't changed. You guys might remember this movie, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I saw this movie when I was a kid living in Malaysia in 1981, right? And this movie gave many people their first glimpse of what the Middle East was like. Observe this scene. This is Indiana Jones fleeing the Nazis, and you see what back then people might assume to be a typical scene of any country, any city in the MENA region. Observe how the local people are shown. Now, the thing is, are scenes like this actually affecting people's perception of countries in this region, including the UAE? And my argument is yes, because check out this incredible statistic from Hans Rosling. So we know that the UAE has one of the best education systems in the world, right? More than 95% of kids here actually go to schools and good schools. But Hans Rosling did a survey, and he asked global populations if you had to estimate what percentage of children in the UAE have access to good schools. Most people guessed that it was only 30 to 70%. 50% of people outside the UAE think that there is a problem with education here in the Middle East, and only 30 to 50% of kids can go to school. In other words, more than half the kids, they believe, have to beg on the streets or don't have access to actual schools. This is today, even with the beautiful ads of Dubai all around the world. This is what the majority of the human species believe today because of how our ideas get locked in time. Now, this is my country, Malaysia. This is Kuala Lumpur, and those buildings over there, the Petronas Twin Towers, was something that people in my country had such pride in. But this picture that you're seeing is actually a doctored picture from the movie Entrapment. And this picture really disappointed many people in my country, including the government, because to emphasize how different Malaysia is from the West, this scene was edited to show slums. Those slums don't exist. That is pure Photoshop. But again, images like this cause us to create irrational fear. So in the 1980s, 40% of the world population lived in poverty. Ask yourself, what number is that today? If 40% of the world population lived in poverty, what number of people live in poverty today? And again, almost invariably, you are going to overestimate this. The actual number is 10%. We are actually 5 years ahead of the UN SDGs in terms of reduction of poverty. We are doing an incredible job of reducing poverty, but people don't know this. Hans Rosling said 92% of people answer wrongly. It's difficult to accept that extreme poverty is declining at such a rapid rate. Now, if you want to explore some of these other false prejudices that you might have about the world, check out gapfinder.org by Hans Rosling. It's a website designed to help educate you to overwrite some false assumptions that we may have about the world. Now, this is something I find really, really interesting. When you think about countries like India and China, in our minds, we tend to think of these countries as being poor. But actually, the average person in India today, the average, has the same standard of living as the average Swede in 1920. The average person in China has the same level of living as the average Swede in 1950. But not only that, the average person globally today has the same standard of living as the average European in 1967. When I grew up in Kuala Lumpur, I was born in 1976 in Malaysia, and I would think about, wow, maybe someday I could live in Europe and have all those things those Europeans have. Today, that is the average person in the world. So we are growing, we are accelerating as a species at a remarkable rate, but we don't see it. And because we don't see it, we are prone to fearing what happens when we let more migrants in, or when we accept more refugees. And we are prone to negatively judging people of other cultures and societies. We create a mental bogeyman in our heads. And if I can share a really crazy story, I'd like to. I was in San Francisco 5 years ago at a big industry dinner. And the who's who of Silicon Valley was there. The founders of Google were there, some of the leading experts in AI. And I happened to be sitting next to a billionaire. An actual billionaire. We all knew he was a billionaire because we had flown in his private jet from LA to this dinner in San Fran. A really, really, really nice man. But as he sat down in front of me, not realizing that I carried a Malaysian passport, he made a really interesting comment. He said, you know, I hope another September 11 never happens. And I think we need to really, really support President Trump in his policy of a Muslim ban. I think no Muslim should be allowed in America or Canada. So I probed him. I'm like, really? Why? And he goes, because they are fundamentalist Muslims. And I go, yeah, but that percentage is so tiny. And he goes, yes, but that tiny percentage can infect everyone else. And then we could have terrorists within our borders. So I said, you're saying that all Muslims should be banned from North America for good? And he goes, yes. Now, this man didn't know that I carry a Malaysian passport, which is essentially a Muslim country. But what I found really curious was this. Next to this man was Anusha Ansari, the first Muslim astronaut. She's an Iranian woman who also happens to be a billionaire, who funded the X Prize, who helped fund private space travel, and is the first Muslim woman in space. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and we almost laughed. We couldn't understand where his prejudice came from. But this man, almost in his 70s, had locked himself in a time warp. Now, neither me nor this Muslim astronaut were angry about what we heard. We were not offended because we knew he was an old man and his ideas were going to die with him. But this is how crazy certain people can have in terms of their perspective. David Bohm explains it this way. This is a very convoluted quote, but essentially the physicist David Bohm says, what we take to be true becomes our reality. What we believe to be true about the world is how we will observe the world. If you believe people from Africa, or people from the Middle East, or people from Europe are a certain way, you will observe those behaviors. Those behaviors will validate your belief, and you will go, aha, I am right. So our minds delude ourselves. The question is, what have you convinced yourself to be true? When I was being driven here to this event, Hamad Al-Yahya, who is the Assistant Undersecretary for the Minister of Education, was driving me, and he said a really beautiful quote. He said, you know, here in the UAE, we believe that judging a person does not define them. Rather, it defines who you are. And this is why we are so open about all cultures in this city. So back to Darwin. Darwin goes on to say this: sympathy beyond the confines of man, that is humanity to the lower animals, seems to be one of the latest moral acquisitions. Here he is talking about the environmentalist movement. And he goes on to say, by virtue, one of the noblest with which man is endowed seems to come incidentally from our sympathies becoming more and more tender and more widely diffused until they extend to all sentient beings. What do you think he means here by sentient beings? Was Darwin suggesting that the mountain gorillas or that dolphins were potentially sentient beings? It's interesting to wonder. He goes on to say, as soon as this virtue is honored and practiced by some few men, it spreads through instruction and example to the young and eventually becomes incorporated into public opinion. What he's saying is, everything that we believe about other ethnicities or other nations is stuff that we make up and that we learn from our parents. But as these ideas get loose, the young do not see it. This is perhaps why Nelson Mandela said, no one is ever born hating someone else because of the color of their skin or their background or their religion. No, hate is something you learn. And if you can learn to hate, you can be taught to love, because love comes much gentler into the human heart. If you look at countries all across the world, all countries globally are moving towards what we call emancipative values, and we're moving at a very rapid rate. Emancipative values means women's rights, it means the environmental protection, it means clean government free of corruption, and we're moving at a strikingly rapid rate, which is really exciting. So as older generations die, what is happening, what is happening is that we are changing the way we perceive the world, and it's happening really fast. Let's look at this question. Are mixed-race marriages okay? In 1991, 51% of Americans believe that the answer to this question was no. Can you believe that? Just 30 years ago, the majority of Americans believed it was wrong for a black man and a white woman to marry. In fact, you go back 60 years, and there's this story about how Sammy Davis Jr. was denied a performance at the White House by President Kennedy because Sammy Davis was a black man married to a white woman. This was 60 years ago. In 2011, 4% of Americans thought it was wrong. Today, if you're in the US and you think it's wrong for multiracial marriages to happen, you're just considered crazy. In half a century, the world completely changed because older, prejudiced people tend to die, and younger generations do not see the world in the same way. So I believe Darwin's prediction is right. And where is this going to take us? Imagine that example of mixed-race marriages and how much it changed in 50 years. 50 years from now, a lot of the things that we take as truth today are likely going to shatter. Are we going to see a one-world government? If you've seen Star Trek, that movie, are we going to be living in an Earth Federation? Will borders be open everywhere, like how the European Union functions? Will the UK rejoin the EU? One of the things we know is that these values of unity tend to rise up as education goes up. There are signs for this. And I finally want to leave you with this one quote by Sheikh Zayed Al Nahyan. So when he was told that 85% of the UAE was made up of foreign workers, he said this: the livelihood is from God, the money is from God, the land is God's, the grace is God's, we are all God's creation, and he who has trusted God will never fail, and those who come to us are welcome. I love this quote because I think the UAE is actually, of all the countries I've visited, over 70, is the country that I believe most exemplifies what Darwin is saying about the future of humanity. So remember, our planet is getting better and better. Our human species is getting wiser and wiser, and we are moving more and more towards Darwin's prediction of a truly unified human race. And I hope that as people in government, when you think about policy, you don't think about policy based on the mindsets and the prejudices that you have right now that you inherited from your parents, but you think about the next generation and how they are going to view the world. And you let your biases and your prejudices die with you. Thank you.